I love whales. I think they're majestic. I think they're beautiful. I am quite frankly a horse girl for whales. But because I consume so much whale content, I am exposed to every grizzly orca killer whale attack you can possibly imagine. They are the serial killers of the sea. A killer whale will mess you up real bad on purpose and kind of enjoy it. I saw footage of them as they sort of beached themselves to snag the seals and then sort of flop themselves back. And since that time, I am convinced we are on just borrowed time until the orcas come ashore and defeat us as a human race and come for us kind of like the purge. And it really wakes me up at night with a chill.
Welcome to your weirdest fears. I'm your host, Larry Mullins here. When you have a nickname of killer whale, of course people are going to be afraid of you, right? Well, if this is your first time listening, welcome in. Every week we're unpacking fears, figuring out the facts, and sometimes learning how to overcome them. Well, the fear of killer whales is called cetophobia. Admittedly now, these guys are pretty cute, especially when they're jumping around in the ocean. So did these guys get a bad rap, or should we actually be afraid of them, like our listener who says they're a horse girl, but for whales? Okay, I'm joined by Dr. Deborah Giles, who researches killer whales. Dr. Giles, right off the bat, the name killer whale is pretty intense. Where did that come from?
It's actually a flip of the name. So the Spanish explorers, the first ones that were documenting things, saw whales killing whales. So they were called whale killers. The translation from Spanish to English flipped those names to become killer whales. People say that we should call them orcas, for their Latin name is Orcinus orca, but that's not much better because that translates to something like demon devil of the sea.
When I think of killer whales or orca or whatever, I look at them and just as that they're cute. I used to see them at SeaWorld before they stopped doing all of that when I was a child. I grew up in Orlando, but I never thought of them as killer. I always thought the great white or whatever.
Absolutely. I believe that white sharks get a bad rap as well. They have attacked people for sure, but statistically, it's still a very small number of people are attacked by great white sharks. With regard to killer whales, there's only actually been two, what I would consider attacks on humans in the wild. And both times the killer whales broke off the attack before the person was injured. There have been a number of more recent situations where killer whales are attacking boats, but they're not doing it for the people. These whales are very curious. They're very playful. And the boat situation might just be a fun thing.
You mentioned something a moment ago when you said they were regarded as whale killers. What are they like with other species?
Well, killer whales worldwide are considered the same species, Orcinus orca, but they're actually very different. We call them ecotypes, and there are currently 10 recognized ecotypes of killer whales around the world. And what I mean by that is essentially how they make their living, what they do for food, and what their family structure is like. So the ones that I study here with my nonprofit Wild Orca are fish-eating killer whales. They don't eat mammals at all, but in the same water, sometimes even at the same time, are another group called Biggs killer whales. We used to call them transient killer whales because they weren't here all the time. And those guys eat mammals. Those guys do not eat fish at all.
Okay, so before we go on, can you tell me where are they located so I can make sure I don't go swimming there next summer, please, Dr. Giles?
Actually, you're not supposed to swim with them, but people have been in the water with the mammal eaters, and it's not a problem. I don't encourage people to be in the water with killer whales because it's their space. I truly believe that we need to give them that space. But if one was to find themselves in the water with a killer whale, what would happen, if anything? Most likely the whales would swim right by without stopping. If anything, they're very curious animals, especially the younger ones. And so I could see an animal coming up to somebody and just checking them out, echolocating on them. I was just talking to somebody 2 days ago who was doing some research diving, and a young one came up behind them and got right where they're scuba diving. The whale was echolocating on them, and they could feel it in their body. They couldn't see. The water was so murky. They couldn't feel the whale right behind them, echolocating on them. And he just checked them out and swam off.
That is quite the experience that I would like to feel, but I will never, ever, ever in a trillion years do that.
You mentioned sharks. There is an ecotype of killer whales that specializes on eating sharks.
Oh, wow.
Sharks are fish, so they have to be moving forward where the water is running through the gills in order for them to get their oxygen. So the way a killer whale kills a shark is the killer whale will swim up to the shark upside down. It grabs onto the shark and then rights itself.
Oh,
and
wow.
Sharks have this thing called catatonic immobility, where if they get flipped upside down, they just stop moving. They become stiff as a board and stop moving. And so in that way, the killer whale just basically swims around until the shark dies of suffocation.
Wow.
They are so smart.
So, I'm sitting here thinking the next time I run up on a shark, I'll just flip him on his back and we're good.
Usually sharks are going to leave you alone as well. But if you punch them in the nose, it gives them sensory overload and they'll kind of shake off and then usually leave.
So about people who are afraid of killer whales or orcas like our listener, do you think it's unfamiliarity with the species that drives this fear that we have? And what's the best way to get past that? And I'm not going to cast you in the role of neurologist or psychologist or whatever, but what's the obvious?
I think you're absolutely right that education is power. And then just diving into the actual documentation or lack thereof, killer whales attacking humans in the wild.
Educate us, heaven forbid, I'm out on a deep sea fishing boat, which is that's one of my greatest fears. I just can't do it. If it's not a 9,000 foot long yacht or cruise ship, you won't see me on a schooner in the middle of the bathtub. Okay. That said, should I fall overboard and I'm among a pod of killer whales or whatever, what should I do?
What you want to know in your heart of hearts is that if you're surrounded by killer whales, you're safe, because that means there are no white sharks around.
Final thoughts as we wrap up regarding orcas and people's fear of orcas.
I think education is the last word, and joy. Find that joy and hang on to that feeling when you're learning about them.
Dr. Deborah Giles, thank you so much. Boy, I've learned a lot from you today. And thank you so much for listening to Your Weirdest Fears. I want to know your fears, so share them. And you could be featured in this podcast. Hit the episode description and you can find ways to connect with us. If you're enjoying this show, please rate us and review our podcast and subscribe to the show. You can find Your Weirdest Fears on the Odyssey app or wherever you pod. Your Weirdest Fears is a production of 1010 Winds and WCBS News Radio 880. Special thanks to our producers, Jill Webb and Dempsey Pillot. Andy Egan Thorpe over there is our audio engineer, and Femi Redwood is the managing producer of podcasts. I'm your host, Larry Mullins. Thanks for listening.